Hi everyone, welcome to An Hour with LawSikho. This is Ramanuj Mukherjee from lawsikho.com and iPleaders. And today with me I have Prachi, who is working at the World Trade Organization. And we are going to ask her a lot of questions about today about how to write the right kind of applications when you are applying abroad, and what universities as well as for jobs and internships, what sort of, like, what should be there on your resume, on the cover letter, even statement of purpose, and things like that. The entire application process, which is very important because many Indian lawyers crave the experience of going abroad and having an international experience. And I think everybody deserves it, to go outside India and experience global standards of working, and bring new things from those countries into our country in the future. And so we have somebody to guide us today. So welcome, Prachi.
Thank you, Ramanuj. Uh, uh, okay. Am I audible again? Sorry
Yeah,
to
you're
ask you.
clearly audible. Everything is fine.
Okay,
So
perfect.
why don't you tell us, in your words, what you do, and your career journey so far.
Okay. So I work as a legal consultant at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. So, and this
I
is,
said World Trade Organization. I'm so sorry. I got it.
yeah, uh, about the same. Yeah.
Okay.
And I work in the legal operations department, which is basically the department in the overall legal department that works on the internal operations. So we advise on transactions here at the bank that deal with the articles of agreement, that is basically the mandate of the bank. And so my work is mostly in Word, where I focus on advising teams at the bank. And for this, I prepared I on international finance laws and international law as a general, like public international law. So basically, the way I got here is I went to ILS for my bachelor's in India. I did my 5 year BSL LLB. Then I went to NYU to finish my LLM over there. And through NYU, I got the opportunity to do this fellowship, which is called the International Finance and Development Fellowship, which basically places you with an international organization for about 3 months at a time. It's a lot of different organizations across the world, and I was placed with this one. And then I continued working there for the last 1 year now.
All right. So, what does your work entail? Like, you just touched on that, you are working on financing documents, but as a lawyer, what sort of role do you play? Like, is it I'm guessing you don't deal with courts, so mostly dealing with what? Like, what is the work?
Right. So, what we deal with is that as international organizations, as you know, have their own mandates. Like, there are different organizations that do different types of work in the international sphere. So, what the UN does is much different than what the World Bank does. And all of these organizations have their internal rules to work in this sphere. So, my job is basically to look at these internal rules and then look at international laws that deal with what we do. For example, we would look at, let's say, public international law in a certain aspect of our financial agreements, and then I advise on that, how these agreements fit with our internal laws, the laws of the countries in which they operate, as well as public international law as a whole.
Okay.
That sounds about a vague definition, but it's basically, and then it's basically a lot of advising teams on how to carry out operations within a legal framework of international law and the legal framework of, let's say, India. For example, if we are doing a project in India.
Okay. So, what does what is the role? I think it'll really help if you can explain what does the World Bank really do? What is its role?
Okay.
And I think people will understand better
Yes.
what exactly it is.
So the World Bank, what it does is that the World Bank, when we talk about the World Bank, we basically talk about two organizations. There's the IBRD, which is the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and then there is IDA, the IDA, the International Development Association. So IBRD basically deals with middle income and lower middle income countries. That's countries like India, China, and those are basically countries that will repay the loans. And then IDA deals with developing and underdeveloped. Underdeveloped is not a great word, but basically countries that need more financial assistance on easier terms. So
Okay.
I work with both these organizations. So the kind of work I do depends on the kind of country I'm dealing with. So if I'm dealing with a country like India, which is a little more financially stable, let's say, then the terms of the way I advise clients will be different, because the financial agreements and everything that we work on will be different. But most of the work that I'm doing right now is under IDA, as we call it here, which is countries that require financial assistance on a longer term and for a lesser interest rate. So this would be countries like Somalia, countries like Cameroon, countries like let's say Uganda. And even in this, the work I'm specializing in is that the World Bank has a department called FCP, which is Fragility, Conflict, and Violence. So these are basically projects we do in countries that are facing these three problems, that are fragile, that have had conflict in the last few years, and that are undergoing states of violence. The way we structure projects for these countries are different than the way we do for other clients. So my job is to advise on these specific projects.
Right. So it's very interesting, and I'm very tempted to ask you about that, but we don't want to divert from our
Yeah.
subject of discussion today, which is, how to go about applying for, one is for universities, second is for internships, and third is for jobs, right?
Yeah.
So, how do we, like, where do we begin? Like, let's start by talking about perhaps what are the common misconceptions?
One of the common misconceptions is that an LLM outside will is like is absolutely, as in, there are two types of misconceptions. Let me start with saying that. So one is that an LLM is absolutely necessary, and the second is that an LLM is absolutely not necessary. And I know this sounds vague, but I'll just explain why I'm saying this. The first, that if when I remember when I started thinking about doing an LLM, these are the two replies I got from different people that I was speaking with. And I think the answer, like, a lot of people will advise you that an LLM is absolutely not necessary for the uh, if you want to, like, go back to a law firm and practice. And then there will be some people who will say that an LLM is absolutely necessary. You need a master's if you want to do anything. And for that, I will have to say that you need to look at what your specialization is, what your calling is, and then decide if you're planning on doing, let's say, for example, litigation, like you're really interested in litigation, you want to go to courts, you want to try cases, then maybe the LLM immediately is not your answer. And another thing is that, but if you want to do something like that is very niche, let's say, for example, international finance or anti-corruption, or even, let's say, space law, which is suddenly becoming a huge area, then an LLM is something that is absolutely necessary. So I would say that depending on what you
So,
want to do.
sorry, Prachi, for interrupting. One thing that,
Yeah.
I was talking to somebody as to how one can get into in an Indian law firm. If I want to
Yeah.
work in a competition law team, with
Yes.
the top firms, like almost all of them have, Ivy League competition law masters.
Yes. And
And
I think that's something that's becoming a norm now. That if you want to do something as niche as competition law, I think an LLM is such a good experience, because then you get to work with, over here they call it antitrust. So you get to work with antitrust and all of these different areas. You get such good comparative knowledge. And I think Indian law firms definitely value that.
so, one thing I just want to say to all those watching, don't have any misconceptions about this. If you go to an Indian LLM, do an Indian LLM, I don't think Prachi is talking about that. Are you talking about that, Prachi? Because Indian LLM program is substantially different than a
Indian
US.
LLM programs are substantially different, and I don't think I would be the best person qualified to answer on those, because I think the application process to the courses, everything is extremely different for an Indian LLM course. Yes. And I was specifically talking about LLMs abroad.
So in India,
Hello?
so yeah, can am I audible? Am I
Yeah, I think I lost you there for a second.
okay? So I'm yeah. So very much true. Like in India, I think if you want to work in a what people try to say is that if you are going to work in a law firm and doing an Indian LLM may not be very relevant because it's very academic in nature usually. But when you go abroad, also, I think one has to be really understand this is a complex situation because there are a lot of LLMs abroad in UK also and in US also. Sometimes they're ornamental. I have had professors of universities in UK tell me in confidence, of course, that we treat people coming from Asia very differently. They are literally it's like the university needs funding and like you guys pay more than our students and it's excellent. So even if a say a Asian student doesn't do um, the dissertation quite up to the mark, they don't bother them. They say, okay, this is your degree and you can go, right? And we have had experiences where we have, because we are in the training business, we see them. So people who have done a full law degree in UK come back to India with good marks, like on paper they are fantastic, but real problems, like in terms of not they're not getting any jobs and really struggling. So yes, it depends on what I guess is objective. A lot of people do LLM, come back, spend a lot of money, and find themselves in debt. And I mean, the LLM is not a magic pill; it's not going to solve your problems. But yeah,
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think especially, but I think it also depends on what university you choose, and that's like one of the things I wanted to highlight is that I always get a lot of messages from people saying that I'm thinking of doing an LLM at this university. What do you say? And I'm always torn because I don't want to say that it's a lot of money that you're spending, and like, do you really want to go to this university? So this is because, but I think that is something that everyone should consider, because the type of university you go to is directly proportional to the type of education you get. For example, schools like NYU make you work just as hard as the JDs. That's the 3 year, is the equivalent to our LLB in India.
mm,
So there is, while I have heard about this lax approach in a number of international universities, because Asian students are just a money making tool in many cases, because we pay full tuition as opposed to a lot of domestic students who get scholarships and everything. So I think if you are spending this much money, then it's good to pull up your socks and like get the most out of this LLM experience, because in the end it's what you make of it, and a large part of that is choosing the university you go to. And it might sound counterintuitive because LLMs abroad are much different. Legal education abroad is much different than what we are used to in India, especially if you're like me and not from a national law school, is because you have to prepare for every class. There are class readings that you have to finish before you go to the class. And then they have the Socratic method of teaching, is basically you are blind called to answer questions. So if you're ready to like put in that much effort, I think you can make most of the LLM, even if you have to come back to India with a debt, and because that's an experience you can't replicate. But then if you choose a university that has had past reviews where LLMs are not subject to the same rigorous treatment as the LLBs or the JDs, then I think you're not making most of this experience. And then it's just, the matter of getting a degree. And then you might as well go to another university or like wait for a few years if that's like the goal.
correct. Work on your CV. Make sure that you get selected in a good place, right? I mean, it's not that difficult if you put in the work. So, what sort of that let's like I think that is a very important question. What kind of CV do you need to get into a good university, and what exactly do they look?
I think everyone's CV is very different. But I think what your CV needs to show is that you are best suited for this course in this university, and that there's no one better than you to do this type of work. And like this applies across the board. This applies when you apply for an LLM, it applies when you apply for internships and a job. And it's that making sure you get a story across, like why are you here, why do you want to do this, and where are you going next. That is something that should come out of your, for example, when you're applying for an LLM, it needs to come out of your personal essay and your CV together. They need to tell this story, and they need to tell this story together. Your cover letter or your, and the same thing applies when you apply for an internship. Your cover letter and your personal statement need to match your CV. And then they all need to say the same thing, that this is what I've done so far. This is what I'm doing right now. These are my strong areas. And this is where I would like to go. So, for example, if I could, and then universities abroad and like jobs abroad, I don't know if any Indian universities right now have a CV writing course or like have people helping students write CVs, but this is something that is particularly true of American universities, at least, is that they have a career center that will help you write a CV. And this, I feel, is where a lot of Indian students fall behind, because the first thing you see when you look at an LLM application is that it says one page CV. And that's where I stumbled, because I'm like, I've never written a one page CV. And so this was, I spoke to some people who had done their LLMs abroad, and I will show you two things, if I may, right now, is how my CV looked before I applied to NYU, when I tried to do the one page CV on my own. And then when I went to NYU and they showed me their careers office and their, they call it a Wall Street template, which is basically one page, crisp information and nothing else. So I'm just going to do a screen share right now.
Yes, please.
And this first is an example of what my CV looked like when I tried to do replicate the one page format on my own. So my CV did not look like this. This was like in my fifth year of law school, right?
I can
Uh,
see that you have kind of cut on the the margins and tried to put in as much
yes,
detail as possible.
yes, you can see like the margin is like I've really skimped on it. So if someone were to print this out and read it, I think a lot of content would get lost. Also,
Hmm.
you can see the font, it's like really small.
Correct.
Here, you can see I have put in my high school for some reason, and then
Yes.
I've put my junior college. Like this is basically till grade 10, grade 12. Um, this is like really unnecessary things. Then
Right.
I did, so basically before, because ILS has a very flexible
No, I
schedule.
totally understand the psychology because when you are in India, you are told your passing marks is matter for it. So you
Yeah,
always
so see,
have
I
to.
say top 1%, top 3%. Like that's ridiculous.
Huh.
It's like
So
no one
you
cares
work
about this
in
stuff.
India. I can totally see this TV working very well in India. I mean, that's how it works here, right?
Yes. And so this is like what I tried to do in my fifth year of law school when I was right applying for my masters. Then I put like they want publications, like American universities value publications a lot. Thankfully I had a few, but then again like it's like it's in a table format over here, and it's like all cramped together. So, and something that I have learned after coming here is that the average person will only spend like about 90 seconds on your CV. So if
Correct.
someone's spending only 90 seconds on this is not great. It's a lot of content to digest.
Yeah, it's basically like a two-page. You have just
Yes,
crammed it into one page. That's all.
yes, by reducing the margins, by reducing the font, it's not very readable.
Right.
That's even a word. I completely get lost with my vocabulary nowadays. Now, then when I sat with NYU,
Yeah.
and this is my CV right now. So,
Okay.
like lots of white space at the top. Then the first thing that needs to come out is your bar status. Like which bars are you enrolled for? Because that is something that they want, professional memberships. This is
Right.
something they like, because if you're qualified to the bar in some country, and more than one country if possible, that is like a highlight, right? because
Okay.
that shows that you've really worked hard towards a qualification. Education, only the main things. No schools, no high schools. You don't need anything else. You don't need to put your marks in there. You can put it if you're an honors student, and honors is like top 5%. You can put that in brackets, but nothing else. And experience, see, I've reduced it considerably, and only your top things. So where I work now, where I worked before, and one internship.
Right.
So this is like, and it needs to be crisp. Now, now you can see here, I'm pointing to the first line. You need to have one line in every experience part, summarizing what you do. And then you can have your main deals or your main activities as bullets under it. But this is something that needs to be in your CV, is that one line that will, if someone's looking at this for 90 seconds, they need to know one line where they know what I'm doing, what are my main responsibilities.
Hmm.
And that's something that needs to be there in all CVs. And if so, this is a longer form. So this is like the first page. So if someone says one page CV, I
Hmm.
just send this one out. Sometimes they'll let you know that they want a little more.
Very
In
profile.
that case, you can prepare and keep an extra page. This is where your research goes. If you have research and publications, if you have been given any honors and awards, and any additional information like the languages you speak, etc. This can go on to the second page, and you call it an addendum to your resume. But if not, just one page is more than enough. And
So
another,
just
yeah, sorry.
this reminds me of something. So
Mhm.
recently, I came across the profile of somebody who is a professor in India, right? And I had heard that he is a
Hello.
director of one university, requested me for a reference. So I forwarded the CV, and the CV was 26 pages.
Yeah. So
That
it's
happens in India.
yes, but I think a professor might be more easy to get out of it, like get away with it,
Yeah.
because and a lot of times universities have like a detailed bio of their professors, which can run into pages because they write so much. But if you're applying for a job, no one will have the time to read so much.
No, I
It's
think it works sometimes even in academic jobs that
yes,
you have this huge list of publications and people are nobody's gonna read it. They'll be like, wow, so many pages of
yeah.
publication, intimidated by
And
it.
I think that is something that might work in India, like having multiple page CVs, because before this, I had never written a
Law firms
page.
live in law firms in law chambers. Nobody appreciates it. If you have a three-page CV, it's like this person doesn't know how to write a CV. That's the
Yeah.
thing.
And something that I have, like, this is like an anecdote, like someone's told me, is that if you can't tell someone what you do in one page, then you're not doing a good job at it.
Right. So we are supposed to be good communicators.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, definitely, like we're not able to communicate our value in one page. One page is a lot of text. Like honestly
Yes.
speaking, your CV has a lot of text even after all the changes, right?
Yeah. And then it's like every word on there has to be necessary. So when you read your CV, you need to ask yourself, like, do I really need to say this? Is it going to add value? And
So I
about,
have a story behind what to exactly write in the CV.
yeah,
Like the parts where you have written, this is the work I have done in an internship or in a job. So we teach we teach our students. We don't have career offices. We teach our students.
yeah,
So what we say is that remember that this CV is going to be in the hands of the interviewer if you are going for a
yeah,
job. Okay,
yes,
and if there's any kind of interview, and they are going to read that, and they're
yes,
going to ask questions based on that.
yes,
So every sentence should be a conversational hook, which leaves something unsaid. Even like you say that I researched on this question, and just leave it at that. Because people, when they read, they'll naturally ask you, and that is when you show off your skills and your knowledge in the interview also. So, in your experience, do you think that there are any personal interviews in case of college selections at all ever?
Um, I didn't have to go through a personal interview. Sometimes they will ask for and I don't think Indian students in general have to for the LLM, because we do most of our legal studies in English. So a few friends of mine who had to give interviews were friends from China, friends from Korea, who for whom English was truly a second language. So in that case, they only had to do like a language interview. But once you have your LLM, at least was my experience with NYU, is that we had to speak with our career advisors from time to time to select the uh, subjects that we chose to do during the LLM, and for different fellowships or like internships or even jobs that we had to apply for. And I think this is like interviewing skills and all like help you build towards this.
Okay.
And
So,
then the major interviews that I had to give were for my internships and my job, obviously.
okay, great. So, how should somebody, like somebody who's in India and trying to write a CV, I think it's very important for them to get a second opinion on what they have written and
Yes.
get it by somebody else. So, who should they approach, in your opinion, in your
I
experience?
think it is very good to approach seniors who are outside or who have worked outside. So even for the first CV that I showed you, I spoke to my boss who had done an LLM from Harvard at the time. And then he helped me hone it down, so it is always best to reach out to people who have done an LLM from abroad, who have worked abroad for a while, and those people will be more than happy to guide you through this. And another thing is that to get started, there are a number of resources online that people can use. So I'm just going to do a screen share again. uh, so one second. Right, sorry. Here we go. Right. So if you just type in NYU Job Research Handbook in Google, the
Okay.
first result that comes out is the LLM Job Search Resources Handbook. And see, this is like not behind a paywall or it's not on NYU's website. This is available for everyone. And I think this is one of the best resources for Indian students to get started. See, this has a resume template, like the one I showed, like the one where I use. And
Yes.
this is perfect. This is something people can get started with. And in case you don't know anyone who has done an LLM, or like you can't reach them on time, all of these resources are free and then they're online. And this has like a lot of information, like how do you write it, writing style of a CV, of a resume, specificity, essentials. And then it also has a list of words to use. Like one thing I've noticed in especially in Indian CVs is that we use the word work a lot. I worked on, I did this, like all that. So American CVs especially value action words, is what they call. So like facilitated, dedicated, managed. Action words like these are what you need in your CV. So resources like these will help you get started in at least like writing uh, a CV that's more on international standards.
Great. Yeah, in fact, we have been I usually, when I write something around how to write your CV, I exactly mention these points. And also, I didn't know about the NYU handbook, but I usually refer them to Harvard career offices. Even
Yes.
there, they have like all the templates and everything, even
Yeah.
list action words are available on the website.
Yeah. So they're all online. Like I was surprised to find out after I went to NYU that these resources were just lying there, like the Stanford, like and the Harvard handbook, like is this Career Resource Center. So make use of these resources to the fullest because they're gold resources that are just out there.
Absolutely. So, if you can tell us a bit about your experience of applications, how was it? Like when you were
So I
applying for.
Right. I'll speak specifically with respect to this fellowship. So, like I mentioned, like NYU has a fellowship with the World Bank, and you have to apply. It's very competitive. And the three things that they asked me to write for that is obviously a resume, again, a one-page resume, a personal statement about why I wanted to work with this particular department, and a writing sample that would match the work that I would be doing here. And the personal statement for me was the hardest because that's the first time I had to like look at a department and tell them why I wanted to work there. And a lot of times the job that you're applying for and the background that you have will not match. Like you may have like a securities law background and the job will be a little more corporate or a little more wider than you thought. And then you have to tell a story about why you want to do this and why you're the best suited for this. And I think this is something that was the most challenging for me when I was applying. The second one was that I
How,
had to,
I mean, can I, if I can stop you for a
yeah,
moment? How did you
sure.
manage to tell the story? If you can give us some specific.
So what I did was I looked at the job requirements. So they have like in the US they have like a very specific template on which they ask you about what the job requires. And then I looked at my resume and like sat down and made a list of all the things I had worked on before that matched this requirement. And again, this was where the NYU careers office like really helped me, is that they said like you should not write anything in your personal statement that does not match what they require. So basically they required me to have worked with like public finance and everything. So I sat down, made a list of all the things that I had worked with that related to this. They needed drafting experience and research experience. So I made a list of all the things that I had drafted. And then one thing that you need to write in your personal statement, not need to, but it's very good to, is that you need to give examples. You can't say that I worked on mergers and acquisitions. Like there's hundreds of people who will say that. You need to have a challenge, like when you worked, and I'm sure everyone has this, like, but we're not very good at like remembering this and writing this down. Like this was a challenge that I faced at work. This was what I knew about it, and this is how I resolved this challenge and found a solution to it. So this is what goes in your personal story, like because it tells the interviewer that you're the best suited for this job because you can resolve all these challenges that might come.
Correct. So there is this STAR methodology, right? STAR.
Yes,
So can you tell us a bit about that?
right. I actually have like I had I remember someone speaking about it very recently. So it's basically like the situation. So over here they call it the SAR, the situation, action, and results. So you explain what situation you faced. This is basically a challenge. Then you
T for
explain
task.
the actions you took. Yeah.
Yeah. STAR.
And
So situation and then task and then
yes,
actions and results. Yeah.
and results. I think we call everyone calls it different. And then one other advice I received is basically a colleague of mine at work, and she uses this technique called KISS, KISS, which is basically keep it simple, stupid. So, like whatever you write, every sentence has to be less than 20 words. It has to be punchy and it has to make sense. So, like, follow these two techniques, like, explain what you do, why you're the best suited, and keep it short, keep it simple, keep it like it should be easy for everyone to understand and grasp. Like, you can't go into the specificities of a transaction and say that the financing structure was so complicated and then I did this to resolve it, like, made this thing, blah, blah, blah. No, no one's going to be interested in it. You need to keep it very short. Like, you need to make your challenge such that everyone will be able to understand it. And then you need to explain your solution in a similar manner.
Right. Yeah. So, interestingly, whether any job that one may apply for, even in India, if they
Yes,
use these approaches, it works wonders. But
yes.
most people get away without doing it because the culture, the standards are not there. People, when if you do this, people will be surprised and pleasantly surprised, and they will be, it makes it that much easier to get hired.
I think
But
they will have an added advantage over other candidates who might not be doing this. So it's always good to do it, whether here or in India. And I believe like the standards in India are also changing. Like no one wants to read, like you said, no one wants to read more than 3 pages, like 3 page series anymore. So I
yeah.
believe it's to work over there as well.
Yes, absolutely. So, if you can tell us a little more about, what was actually the experience of studying at NYU, and how did it like really benefit you, like long term?
So I took a number of and the in the U.S. universities you have the credit system, so you get to choose from a number of classes, and you have to fulfill a minimum number of credits. I was supposed to take 12 every semester, and different classes based on how important they are have a different number of credits. So if it's a 2 hour class, it will generally have 2 credits. So you have to like combine different classes, and then all of these classes have to make sense when someone looks at your transcript completely. You can't do something like art law and then do securities regulation. Like you can, obviously, but make sure again you have a story to justify why you did art law and securities together in your masters.
Right,
So
it's a dangerous path to work down. Like if you do that, it might as well work. Sometimes you don't know.
it
Some
might work. Like you may end up doing securitization of like art or something, but then you need to have that story in mind. Like because the LLM is extremely tempting because there are such interesting subjects that are going to be on offer that you want to do them all. But then you have to remember that the LLM is for specialization. You can't do basic subjects again. You just can't study only constitutional law and contract and property because that's like repeating what you did. Or granted, you'll be studying it in a different country, but your specialization has to make sense. You need to specialize and hone yourself in one area. So that's the advice I took from my careers advisor. And I took classes on finance, on corporation, and even within finance, I took classes that NYU had about the future of finance. So it was basically like what happens. Like one of my classes was basically about the recovery from the 2008 crisis and how do we prevent a crisis like that in the future. So it's all about financial solutions to economic crisis. Another one was about digital currency and the future of the financial industry. So it's basically I studied blockchains just when blockchains were becoming the newest topic, right? So it's like you need to understand, like you need to build up your specialization while you are during your LLM. And another experience about the LLM is that you need to prepare. Like I said, you need to all American universities require you to do a reading and then show up for class. You can't just show up for class without preparing. So you need to know the subject in detail. So that is one thing. The other thing is that they value independent study. So a lot of my classes were papers, and where I had to like go to the professor, tell them like I plan to write this. Then the professor would sit with me and help me, like ask me to do an outline. Like what did I think about this? What were my ideas? Where was this paper going? What were my conclusions? And it is like so there I got to deal with like one research subject in utmost detail. Like one of my papers, like it was a year long seminar. It started in October. I had to like form a scheme of the paper in October and submit it in May. And my professor helped me out throughout. And it was basically like a possible litigation. So I had to write a paper on what would happen if the people involved in this one blockchain hack would sue the company, and where would they do it. So it involved everything from jurisdiction to the possible result. And independent
almost like the
writing like
experience of
this is
working
very
on a real case, right? Like that gives you in depth. Like it's almost like working on a real case.
yes, almost because you are theorizing and you are like exploring law all on your own and saying that if this happens this will happen, and you have to like substantiate. And most of these classes will also have a presentation where you sit with your it will be a small class like 15 people at the most, and you present your paper and then they ask you questions, almost like defending a thesis. So this is an experience you don't get in most Indian law schools. And that I think is like those two things are the most valuable things I learned from my LLM.
This I'm very tempted to share this with you. So in we run these online courses, and we
Yeah.
realized in our 6 years of experience initially that no matter how simple we make the study material, people are not going to read. Okay, so they will appear for the exam just night before the exam. They'll read something hurriedly, and I mean, in a way, our courses were failure because we couldn't deliver the we're teaching anyway online. We do not have access
Yes.
physically to the students, and we're not able to deliver what we want to deliver. Like if somebody really reads, but those are like 10%, 5% students who
Yeah.
actually sit down and read and then appear for exams and stuff. So what we did now, like eventually what our current model is that we give the study material and say that we don't care when you're going to read this material or watch these videos. Every week there are two exercises. You do the exercise and then come to the class. And then we will talk about the exercise that you have done. And the reality is that when they try to do the exercise, they have to go and read. Because without reading, they will not be able to solve the exercise. And this has been working very well. People complain a lot that this is very difficult and rigorous, but that is working so well. And the fact is that even when our students are going to law firms, because we keep in touch with the law firms also, and law firms are preferring to select our students on our recommendation. People are performing well in the class simply because they have they're able to do the work much better, and there's a clear difference in the quality of the interns. And so much so that right now our students have flooded with internship opportunities that we don't have as students. I am saying this only because I can totally understand when you are going like learning like this. The problem when we faced when we were studying in college was that we are not involved in the studies. You were telling me sections and case laws in India, right? So how is any law taught? If you tell them, okay, teach art law, they will find a law that talks about art and tell you the sections and find some Supreme Court judgments and just tell you those things. And listening to that is really boring. But if somebody gives you a task that okay, there is this, if you like you said art securitization, right? If you tell a student that if art securitization is to be done, then okay, first you build an SPV. So create the documentation, like documents for the
Yeah.
SPV. Then okay, now the SPV is created. The next step is what other documents are you going to create out of this? I think that really makes people interested and engaged. And I think there's a long way for Indian law schools to go in that direction. Faster we start, better. But so far, we don't see this happening in India much.
And that's, I think, like that's really great that you're doing it that way, because a lot of Indian students, including me, who came for the LLM, like we really struggled because we're not used to preparing for lectures. We're not used to like, and then the questions are not like what does section so and so of this act say. The questions are basically like this person does this, then this person does this. uh, can this person file a case against that person, and who will win? And then for that, you don't like, there's like no way you can answer that question unless you know the theory and the principles, and like the sections are almost useless in this.
Right. So I think, I mean, I hope in India also we start doing this. Then
Yeah,
maybe we'll not have to go abroad for this education.
I know it will save us a lot of money.
Okay. So can you tell us a little bit about like how did you plan your career? Like you joined NYU, it's about 1 year you were there, I understand. So, very less time to be honest. 1 year is hardly any time. So many classes going on and so much work. So, how did you plan it? Like what you going to do eventually, and how did you make? I think you need a plan from the beginning.
To be honest, yes, but then plans you make about this hardly ever work out. And I like to say that I have been quite lucky that I applied for this fellowship and then I got this fellowship, because that was one of the less painful ways of getting a job abroad. Otherwise, you need to have a story. And in the
At
US,
what point did you get the fellowship actually?
sorry?
At what point of your LLM did you get the
Right.
fellowship?
So the fellowship is such that you have to apply by November, and you have interviews in December to January. And by February, you know whether you get it or not. And then again, it's only for 3 months.
So
So,
this is at the beginning of your LLM itself, right?
yes, so like towards the end of the first semester is when you start applying for it. And that's why you need to like know all of these resources from the moment you join. And you need to make a plan that I'm going to apply for this, I'm going to apply for this. On the side, I'm also going to look for jobs. So one of my plan was like to apply for all of these fellowships, of course. Then I was reaching out to a number of people who are working here. So networking is a huge part of trying to find a job, or even trying, because I think networking is a huge asset, because firstly, coming from India, you don't know the kind of work people do in law firms abroad. And if that's your goal, you need to meet people to understand what type of work they do. And this will help you later when you interview for them, or even interview elsewhere, because then you'll have an added advantage. So two things you need to do if you're doing an LLM abroad is that you need to start making a list of things you want to apply for, and you need to start making a list of people you need to speak to get more of an idea into what they're doing, apart from using the LLM to actually become a specialized lawyer in one niche subject.
So, generally what I have heard from the previous speakers who told us, about studying, doing an LLM in the US, people told us that number one, doing LLM is not a good idea if you want to work in the US, because one or two out of 100 people actually get a job after doing an LLM. So you are probably the one or two out of 100. So congratulations. But
No,
mostly
no.
that people do not get a job after doing an US LLM. So they have to come back to India. And this I've heard. I thought maybe it is different at Harvard, but even those who are doing Harvard LLMs are coming back to India at present. Maybe it's also the political environment and everything is against immigration across the world right now. So, I mean, what is the strategy, or I mean, what is the reality of this? Like, would you say it is as bad as that? Because many people have this on their mind that if I'm going to do an LLM abroad, especially if they're taking a loan, they have to pay it over a period of time.
Yeah.
So, coming back to India and paying it back is like really difficult. So,
I think I generally take a very different approach than that, because one of the things I remember before starting my LLM is a lot of people saying that it's not worth it because you won't get a job. I think it's really discouraging for someone who's taking on such a huge loan, or like making a huge investment, to hear that at the outset. So I think, if anyone's like people who are coming in for the LLM, I always tell them, like, come with an open mind, come with the assumption that you're going to work extremely hard, that you're going to have to work extremely hard, like harder than most JDs, harder than the other LLMs. And then make sure you give it your best. Like, make sure that you don't have any regrets, that maybe I should have gone for that event, maybe I should have gone for that coffee, maybe I should have applied for that job that opened up. And I think if you make sure you do all of that, your chances are very high. Because this is something I heard from a friend, a colleague who works in New York now, is that everyone in their batch who really wanted to stayed. And I think that that's like a very philosophical thing maybe to say, but I think it's a very good principle to come on, especially when you're making a huge investment, is that get ready to work extremely hard. Like, it's very painful. Like, the LLM is like the most painful experience of my life. And it's but it's worth it, and make the most of it. There are way too many resources that people take for granted, including starting and including libraries in law schools, professors. There are professors who are partners at law firms, there are professors who are authors, who are judges. One of the professors at New York, at NYU, is the chief in-house counsel of the New York Times. Like, you are not going to get exposure like this anywhere else, and it's up to you to make the most of it. And if you do, then there's nothing like it.
okay. I
So
mean, that's very
yeah,
positive.
and
That's the most positive thing I've heard about USL ever.
no, I feel it's really hard on students to hear that no, there's no jobs here. The immigration situation is tough, of course.
Even other people didn't say there are no jobs. They said that very few people statistically get it. One of them got a job, and it was also because she had her husband who was already working there, and she had a
Yeah.
spouse. So it was easier for her to stay back and kind of get that. Otherwise, people
Yeah.
get about 1 month to get a job after they graduate. If they don't get it in that time, they don't.
Yeah.
And
It's
her first job was an internship with an Indian lawyer who was there. So, and
Yeah,
yeah,
I think it's very difficult, and the immigration situation doesn't help. You need a sponsor, and because like the Indian legal market is not open to firms outside, we are not as marketable as, let's say, Latin American lawyers. So firms like Baker and McKenzie don't have a Mumbai office. I don't think they do. So they will be like less likely to hire someone from India, but they will be very happy to hire someone from Brazil because like that is their legal market. So like come in with the reality, like have a reality check that maybe you're going to have to work harder than everyone else, but then also that you have marketable skills. A lot of Indian students are extremely talented, and they need to make sure that they get that across. What happens with a lot of other international students is that they're able to bridge that gap and tell everyone what they're good at, what their skills are, what their transferable skills are. And people who have worked at law firms in India, litigated for several years, who come here for their LLMs, have to like have amazing skills. And then I think that if they're able to get that across, I think that's positive.
okay,
And
great.
with immigration, you're on the same footing as everyone else. So that's something you can't change. But yeah,
Okay. And so, would you say that it is better to do a JD than an LLM, given the opportunity? There are 2 year JDs. In
yeah, there are 2 year JDs, but the thing is, see, again, now I come to the immigration nitty-gritties. With your student visa, you get to work for 1 year after your student visa. And that does not change with the type of legal degree you do. So even JDs get only 1 year to work after the JD, and LLMs also get 1 year to work. That's because the amount of time you get to work after your degree in the US depends on what type of degree you do. And law is not a STEM, that's a science, technology, engineering, mathematics degree. So you only get a 1 year work permit. So if your plan is to work here, then you're eventually going to need a sponsor. And for that, if the LLM also gives you 1 year, the JD also gives you 1 year. My calculation was that I'd rather do an LLM because I'm spending half the money.
okay, so you get 1 year.
Yes, you get a 1 year work permit. It's called an OPT. So if you get a job, you get to stay for 1 year. And that's true for the JD as well as the LLM.
What if you don't get a job? What if you want to do a start?
So you get 3 months to stay. You get like 90 days after you graduate to find a job. If within those 90 days you don't find a job, then you have to go back. If
Right,
you don't find a job, then those 90 days are stopped till the end of your job. Then they start again. So basically, you get 90 unemployed days while on this work permit. So you can choose to use them anytime. So I use them between my internship and between the time I got my job. So like that's why a lot of people take up any job they get right after graduation because it stops the clock from ticking, so to speak.
right, right. So, what are the other things we have gone through? Like about 5 minutes left. What would you like to share? Anything else?
I would say if you're this is a question I've gotten recently, is that if you're coming for the LLM, should you give the New York bar or the California bar, depending on where you are? Because uh, because in order to give that, India is not. You need to take a few additional courses, like legal writing, for example, ethics, because you have not studied those. They don't consider India to be a fully common law country, so you need to do some common law subjects. And I would say if you're spending so much on your LLM, like you should like just spend a little more and do the bar as well because that makes you dual qualified. Again, the bar is also a lot of study, but if you're investing in your LLM, like make sure you invest in the bar too.
Okay. And how did you prepare for the bar?
So you have courses over here like Kaplan, the same as the way GRE courses are offered in India. you have those courses, they have a set timetable, and I would say like follow that timetable, because you will be learning some subjects from scratch. For example, American civil procedure, American criminal procedure. Like this is subjects you will not have studied ever in your life before. So that will require like deep understanding and study. And the bar is usually 2 days, 6 hours each day. So that's like 12 hours of exams that I don't think anyone from law school has ever given 12 hours of exams stretched over 2 days consecutively.
Somebody has done, like class 12 in West Bengal board, then they have to have this 3 hours.
Okay, then they definitely have an advantage over the rest of us then.
So it's just that we know how bad it is. We don't
Yeah.
remember bad memories of it anymore.
Yeah, so it's like that. It's a very grueling experience, but I think it's worth it. If you're coming for an LLM, stay for the bar.
Right. So what is the pass rate of the New York bar?
For LLMs, I think it's about 30%.
Okay.
So very, but also you have to keep in mind it also includes, we have an advantage over there because we are well versed in English, and the bar is in English. So one of my really close friends from Brazil, she was like, I need to translate all of this before I can answer it. And it's 200 multiple choice questions. And she's like, that's not like fast enough. Like you need speed for it. You need to, again, it's like going back to your 12th standard thing where you trained on speed in MCQs. So I think Indians have an advantage over there. So let's just like make the most of it.
So probably those who have cracked CLAT or
Yes.
entrance in Punjab University, they
Yeah.
have the New York bar. Okay, great.
No, not really. Like it's like training yourself again, like unlearning and relearning the MCQ method. So it's doable.
Okay, great. But it's all MCQ in the
The second day is MCQ. The first day is essays. So you're tested on both. You have two large essays in the morning. So that's 1.5 hours for each essay. So that's more like a research memo, like two memos in the morning and 6 essays in the afternoon in 3 hours. So that's like the first day. It's all typing. And the second day is 200 multiple choice questions, 100 in the morning, 100 in the afternoon. So
and you don't write this, you actually type this out.
yeah. Yes. You type it. You can choose to write it. But I know only one person who did it, and it's not pleasant.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Great. So I think that is really interesting insights on working in the US as well as application. On the application front, anything you'd like to share?
Sorry.
On the application front, like when you are applying for these, either
Yeah.
internships or
So this I'm let me do a screen share again.
mm,
So these are the questions that they ask. For example, this is the main thing, personal statement. This is my application from NYU. So all applicants may describe their professional interests and goals, blah, blah, blah. So this is the question they ask. This is what your personal statement should look like. And here you can see the professional interests and goals. And here you have to tell your story about why you want to go to NYU. Why do you want to do this particular specialization? And what makes you so good? So this is now my personal statement. I had to dig it up from my old emails, and it's 500 words only. Again, it's like a test of how concise you can be. So the first paragraph is about what makes me the best applicant for this position. Again, people are not going to spend more than 90 seconds on this. So the first paragraph should be sort of a summary. The second paragraph should go into a more detail about what you learned from different, like what is your specialization, what are you interested in. And the third is why the LLM at NYU, like what attracts you towards this specific program. So this paragraph has to be tailored to that organization, sorry, to that university. And the last is what you want to do in the short term and the long term. Like what makes you, like they need to know that you're not doing this just because you have the money or the time to spare. You're doing this because you're really interested in this, and that it fits into your short term goals as well as your long term goals. So this is your application basically, and this is going to determine whether you get in or not, especially for US law schools, because they value this a lot more than your academics.
Very interesting. Okay. So,
Right.
lot of, like this is the question we always get from people. How important is my academics? Now that you have mentioned it, would you also tell, like, how important is it?
It's important with respect to your peers, like where you stand with respect to your peers. For example, the US law school applications, you have to submit your transcripts to this organization called LSAC. And what they do is they convert your score to a relative score. So let's say if you're in the where you stand, I went to ILS, so where you stand within ILS, because you'll be compared to past students that apply to US universities from ILS or University of Pune. And then they'll see that, let's say, 65% is the highest score they had. And this one has 63%. So she is like in this percentile. And so they'll give you a score based on that. So your score is only as important with respect to your peers. But again, it's not the make or break, it's your overall application, your experience. For me, it was the fact that I worked during my law school with with the in-house legal department of a financial institution that counted more. It was like I was able to show that while I was studying, I was also able to get this experience. And that is why it makes me qualified for this LLM. So it's how you write your essay, I think, that it comes down to. That's why it's so important to get it right in those 4 paragraphs that get your story across.
Okay, awesome. I think that's very valuable insight today we have
Mhm.
got from. And thank you so much for joining us and sharing your time.
No, no,
Valuable,
no,
and
it's right
definitely
here.
hope. Great. So we'll be very happy to have you back again another time and share some
Sure.
other insights. And
Yes.
sure, we'll be in touch. And
Yes.
all those who watched this session, thank you very much. And definitely subscribe to the LawSikho channel. We would, we keep doing this every day, 8 to 9 p.m. There
Yeah.
will be a lot of interesting speakers coming up in this week. And on Saturday, however, we'll be doing 4 to 5 p.m. So we
Okay.
hope to see you back, and do subscribe to the LawSikho channel. Everybody, like whoever is watching, and do so that you don't miss any of our notifications and videos. Thank you so much. And thank you, Prachi. It was great having you.
Thank you
And
so much for having me.
goodbye and good night.
Yeah. Thank you so much.